Hi there. You're listening to the Tech Leaders Podcast, brought to you by Be Digital and Tramshed Tech. Today, you'll be hosted by Gareth Davies. Gareth will help you and our guests navigate some of the industry's most exciting topics, from the challenges of sustainable growth through to continuous innovation and everything in between. These are the behind-the-scenes stories from the leaders at the forefront of the digital revolution. So stop typing, close that laptop lid, and tune in for this episode of the Tech Leaders Podcast.
There's not only one way to do something. I was very much a kind of linear, there's only one way to do it. It's probably the way that I want it to be done. Whereas I think at one point in the MBA, we got asked how would you approach the situation? And of the class of 35 at the time, I think 35 people had different answers. And it was like, oh, that's pretty interesting. We've all done exactly the same MBA up to this point, and we've all got different answers. And so I think it's unlikely that any one of those is only going to be the right way. Actually, there are loads of different ways that you can go about it. But what you have got to do is make a decision and go after it.
Bizarrely, following this conversation, I actually felt like I'd known this guy for years. It was really quite strange. I interviewed the brilliant Jack Wearne, and what an amazing story he has to tell. Spending 14 years as a Citibank trader, Jack cut his teeth in the trading pits of Canary Wharf, dealing with credit derivatives, and was actually present during the infamous banking crisis of 2008. Suffice to say, I was very excited to chat about that. But fast forward 14 years, and Jack is now the CEO of comeback king e-commerce specialist Vay Global. Joining at a particularly tumultuous period in the organization's evolution, Jack and his team have managed to miraculously turn around the fortunes of the organization through a combination of clarity of purpose, execution of strategy, and just good old-fashioned hard work. We talk about troubleshooting difficult situations, knowing what you stand for, and keeping things simple. We also cover Jack's perspective on the future of the high street, the impact technology is likely to have on climate change, and much, much more. It's a fantastic conversation. I enjoyed it so much. I hope you will too. It's Jack Wearne. I'm fascinated by this subject, so I'm going to ask you for a very selfish reason, but the financial crisis, I've watched lots of documentaries, lots of films, read books on it, etc., etc. I'm curious, okay, you were in the thick of the action. What was the feeling like around Canary Wharf, City of London? What was that experience, that whole Lehman Brothers going down?
I can remember the Lehman Brothers going down, and I was actually, even on Friday, people were like, there's no way is the bank going to go under. And so I went back to my parents' house in Oxford for the weekend, and then on Sunday it was like, you guys all need to get your asses back into the office. Sunday night, it's the only time as a trader I've had to go in on a Sunday, because we had to be passing through everything and what was going on. So that was pretty horrible. And then I think that at the time, things like the narrative fallacy. Like when you look back, you're like, oh, I can see all of these things and see how things happen. And you fit this story to kind of like what then makes sense in your head. But at the time, it's like, oh, well, that's no one was really thinking, oh, this is going to have a massive knock-on effect to the whole financial system. And that this is going to put Citigroup, I worked at one of the largest banks in the world, this is going to basically could put us under, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And so in hindsight, like the Lehman Brothers moment was a massive moment, but it wasn't probably the stock market didn't bottom out until March 2009. So just over 6 months later. So it wasn't like Lehman Brothers happened and it appeared that everything was inevitable at that point. Like it wasn't that everything was inevitable at that
Citibank
point.
Didn't get bailed out, did they?
They did get bailed out. Yeah, they did. So the US moved really fast, and so Citigroup. So in fact, all the banks, if I remember correctly, all the banks ended up having to take some money. It was a very strange time. I think it was more strange for people who were much more experienced, because for me it was like, well, prices are going down. I mean, okay, prices are going down, they're going down. It's a bit like you show if you show a 2-year-old, if a 2-year-old, someone flies through the room, the 2-year-old won't think it's that amazing because they've just seen people walking through the room and now they've seen people fly through the room. I mean, it's like, hey, stuff's always happening the whole time. Things are new. Whereas you put an adult in there, they're like, oh my God, I've got a flying person going through here. And so I think that for the people who have been much more experienced in financial markets, they're like, I can't compute. My framework doesn't compute with what's going on here. Whereas for me, it was all much newer. And you're like, okay, well, that's what's going on. And so you're able to process it a little bit more. I think that the time when people were most worried about banks going under, I mean, then it was pretty eerie on the trading floors everywhere when it was like, okay, well, could it be Morgan Stanley? Could it be this? Could it be that? Oh my God, what's happening to Merrill Lynch, et cetera, et cetera. Yeah, that was an interesting experience.
What were you trading, Jack? Were you derivatives?
Well, credit. So I was doing bonds and credit derivatives. So your bond would be Daimler Chrysler might issue a bond. And so there might be a 5-year bond where it pays 2%. And then you've got a credit derivative that's basically on that bond. And so they're the derivative is derivative of the main thing you're trading. So it's kind of meant to be two sides of the same coin.
You obviously were there pre-Lehman, pre-2008. Did the banks learn from this? Were the traders taking just as much risk before you left in 2016 as they were prior to 2008? Was there much change?
There was quite a lot of change. It was that change that ended up, making me decide that I wanted to do something else. When in kind of 2008, banks represented 50% of the high yield market. So they were a really important player in the high yield market. By 2016, if I remember correctly, banks represented 5% of the market. And so therefore they were a much smaller percentage of the market. Now, the market had grown massively, but banks were a much smaller player. And so when banks were 50% of the market, they were very well positioned from an information point of view to know what was going on. When they became 5% of the market, they were a bit more of a sideshow, and so therefore you didn't have as much of an information advantage, and so you weren't really as relevant, and that was ultimately one of the things that made me think of I want to go into something else.
Yeah, of course. Okay, I wanted to ask you about MBAs. Okay, what was the biggest lesson you learned from your MBA? Do you think? What was the biggest benefit of doing that MBA that sort of benefited you in your current role as CEO of Vay Global?
I love that question because it's like, well, what was the single thing you learned? And what the single thing I learned was that there is no single thing that turns that really like flips switch. It's all loads and loads and loads of little improvements that you're learning along the way, and maybe that could then I could kind of pass that into the single biggest thing is that you realize that there's not only one way to do something. Like I was very much a kind of linear. There's only one way. Like there's only one way to do it, and it's probably the way that I want it to be done. Whereas I think we at one point in the MBA, we got asked like, oh, how would you approach the situation? And of the class of 35 at the time, I think 35 people had different answers. And it was like, oh, that's pretty interesting. We've all done exactly the same MBA up to this point, and we've all got different answers. And so I think it's unlikely that any one of those is only going to be the right way. Actually, there are loads of different ways that you can go about it. But what you have got to do is make a decision and go after it. And so I learned a little bit about a whole load of things. And what that did was, I guess, if I think about it in the framework of a trader, well, if I used to get 50% of my decisions right, what I've done is done a whole load of little things that help contribute to me getting 55% of my decisions right. That's a huge improvement for me. So it's just all about like little things about like how I deal with people, how I make a decision here, how I pass information. What do I think about this? What do I think about this? It was genuinely transformational to the way that I think about things and approach problems, and maybe much more open-minded in when I address these things.
Yeah, when you talk about business, you sound like you're talking about risk management. Would that be a fair observation? It sounds like you're talking about risk.
Yeah, I guess. Yeah, I guess. Yeah, but I probably do think about it a lot in terms of like decisions are risky. So yeah, I probably do think about it quite a lot that way. Yeah.
That's just an observation. I would have guessed. I've never been a trader. I mean, I'm just guessing. You obviously, as a trader, you must get taught constantly to think about risk, your risk reward ratios and stuff like that.
Yes,
So
exactly. And I think that, and you're right, and I think that kind of that feeds through to the way that I think about business and think about growing a business and think about, I mean, let's say, for example, we spoke about before, like I think the status quo, is a risk. Yeah, everything, there are risks everywhere we look, and so the objective is to try and minimize the bad risk and be making some progress.
yeah, absolutely. So, when you took the chief commercial officer role at Bay Global, it was a pretty torrid time for the organization. Well,
Very torrid time,
yeah,
yeah.
it was a tough time. You jumped into a bit of a shitstorm, let's be honest. Okay, so why did the organization lose its way?
So the marketing and advertising landscape is absolutely huge, and so therefore there was a really quite a strong vision of where the business wanted to go to, but it was too big for what we were able to do, and so it was a bit like we had this vision of colonizing Mars, but the only way of doing it, and the way we were going to do it was by putting 400 people in 25 different offices around the globe. It was like, okay, well, we've got a great vision, but we've got no idea how we're going to be getting there. And so I think that disconnect between like dreams and reality, strategy and implementation, meant that the company was always chasing after that. Everyone in the company was chasing after something that they really knew they weren't going to be able to get to. And so I think that at that point, when people could see, well, we're not managing to reduce our losses, we're not managing to we don't have any concrete plan on how we're going to actually get ourselves to Mars, apart from having all these people all over the world, you then started to have attrition of your best people. And so I think that by the time I came along, we had the wrong people in the wrong seats, in the wrong countries, doing the wrong roles. And so, I mean, I think that of the 400 people that were in V Global when I started 2 years ago, or just over 2 years ago, I think now we're at fewer than 30 of them are left in the business. And we're a business of around 120. So there's been a massive change in terms of who the people are. And I think that is, was really necessary. And you also see, and I talked about like building teams. Not everyone is very comfortable hiring people who are better than them because they're worried about how it's going to make them look. And I think as the business gets into more trouble, people are more worried about their individual jobs and situations. No one wants to be hiring someone better than them at that point. And so you end up with this kind of like lowering of the average talent in the business. And so that requires a lot of changes at that point.
You went in and it started to turn around, and I'm sure you wouldn't take the credit for all of that, Jack. I'm sure it was a very, very a big collective effort with some. I know you got some really good people around you. But I just wanted to find out what did you guys change, and what worked, what didn't work, and how, what's the sort of main reasons, do you think? Not reasons. I'm sure there's a couple of them for sort of turning the fortunes around.
So I think that there was a couple of things. One, as I said, we kind of had a really cool vision of colonizing Mars, or to be more specific about V, it was this marketing and advertising conversions trade. So your advertising is very much like your offsite, you're bringing users in. Your onsite is about optimizing, guiding clients through, basically getting through to the sale, getting more sales out of your site or more transactions out of your site. And marketing and advertising technology are kind of quite separate, and so we had this view of like, well, actually, if we can unify the marketing and advertising stack, that's going to be a really powerful thing in terms of bringing better results for clients, less ad wastage, more recall, a better experience for customers, etc. And that's a multi-billion-dollar business. And so we actually still have a desire to drive towards the marketing and advertising technology convergence play. Think that it's going to happen. one or two of our clients, we're really in bed with them and it's working. But it was way too broad what we were trying to do. It was spread way too thin. So we had proprietary advertising technology, we had proprietary marketing technology, we had so many different offerings, and we were doing all of them in a mediocre way. And we had no clear go-to-market, that we were spread so thinly that no one really knew what we stood for, what we were good at. And I'd almost say that we were kind of not great at anything. We were okay at a load of things, but actually okay at a load of things isn't really where you need to be. Okay at a load of things is going to leave you by the wayside. And so we really, really focused on trimming down our offering, slimming down our offering, getting rid of the products or reducing the number of products we're offering, making the message much, much clearer about what we're doing and what we're able to do and what we're able to deliver for clients. And that in and of itself started moving us in the right direction. Number two, it was a $1.5 billion valuation business. We had to get investors to, and this is probably a bit more when I became CEO, one of the first things I did was say, well, we've got to stop thinking about ourselves as a $1.5 billion business. We've been through a massive transformation. We're a startup. And our aim at the moment, we'd like to become a $1.5 billion valuation business in the future, maybe higher than that. First step needs to be a $100 million valuation business. And that's a very different mindset for people to be getting themselves into. And so therefore, within the company, instead of being like, God, how are we going to get ourselves to being a unicorn again? It was like, no, okay, how are we going to be getting ourselves towards being a $100 million business? And suddenly that felt something that was much more achievable and that people could buy into.
How did you get the team bought into this $100 million vision? Was that something that you did you bang that drum internally?
It's one of those things where it wasn't that hard because people kind of it was already understood and bought into it, but it was one of those a bit like the it hadn't been specifically articulated. So there was a massive communication chasm between investors, the board, the senior team, like the C-suite team, and most of the business at V. And so I think when I first came in, actually, one of the biggest things that I felt I had to do was to get everyone talking. So to be able to get people, so it's like, okay, well, so that as the board, you're like, look, we can't keep, if you want us to keep gunning for this $1.5 billion valuation, like for next year, we're not going to get there. Like I won't be able to help you with that. The people here won't be able to help you. It's not going to happen. We've got to be realistic about exactly where we are. The people internally were also like, they're like, well, if you're I don't know. If you look at our accounts, we've been like a 15, at that point, we were probably like a 15 million revenue business. And so it's like, well, if we're talking about, and we didn't have growing revenue at that point. So you're like, well, we're trying to talk about $1 billion business and we're a 15 million revenue business. So, or a billion, let's make the maths easy for me and say we're looking at $1.5 billion valuation and we're a 15 million revenue business. So what we're saying that we're worth 100 times revenue at the moment and we haven't been growing. I mean, no one's thinking at that point. Whereas if you're a 15 million business and you're saying, well, we're looking at 100 million valuation, and you're like saying, oh, okay, so we're looking at a 7 times multiple. Then you start looking at what other companies like us in our space trade at, and you're like, oh, okay, this starts to be more realistic. Now, there are certain things that we have to be doing to be able to justify that kind of level of valuation of the business. And those have been super hard to do, to turn around and get them moving. And we're still in the process of moving that way. But that then becomes something realistic, credible. People are like, yeah, okay, I'm not looking at 100 times, I'm looking at 10 times. Okay, and we're doing this. And I think that it was being very, very focused on what we need to do and then doing it, as opposed to just saying, oh yeah, well now we want to be a $100 million business. Okay, how are we going to do it? What are we going to do? What are we going to change? And I think that implementation is so important, that everyone internally just knows that I'm so hot on like, well, a strategy is great, but actually how we make it happen is the biggest thing for us.
That's a really important point there. I love that in terms of, the implement. We can all come up with a great strategy, but unless you roll it out, it's completely worthless.
Hi, just a quick reminder that you're listening to the Tech Leaders Podcast. The Tech Leaders Podcast would like to thank Tramshed Tech, who allow us to use their world-class recording studio facilities. We cannot recommend them enough. They also provide office spaces and events, so make sure you go and check them out. Now, back to Gareth, who will be quizzing our guests on some of the industry's most topical questions.
What's a tip for you for another leader, whether it's a team leader or a CEO of a company? When you realize, when you identify what you need to change, how do you execute strategy effectively? Have you got any sort of go-to tips for that or anything?
Yeah, I think that number one, keep it simple. It's super hard, it's hard executing anything in the first place. So therefore, you want your strategy to be, clear and simple and well understood. And so I think that's the first part. Too many strategies that come across, or too many ideas that come across. It's like, yeah, and then we need this, we need this, we need this. It's like, can you think about how many codependencies there are in order to be able to get anywhere? Well, it's never going to happen. So therefore, to me, it's about like stripping what we're trying to do all the way back to the basics, the core, forming a plan around it. And then I think that none of these things are of rocket science, but it's about making sure that everyone understands why you're doing it and what it is you're looking to achieve. It's about making sure that, I think that from a more micro level, it's about identifying people within your team who are going to be your supporters and advocates early on, to be getting other people to be coming along, so that you're not necessarily tackling the loudest naysayer, but you're getting some of the kind of wavering middle people to be involved. It's a lot of communication and going to and say, hey, we're doing this, and then really, really simple. But it's about then holding people to account. If they've said, oh, Jack, I'll get this done by Friday, well, set yourself a little reminder, and on Friday, give Gareth a call and say, hey, Gareth, have you got those numbers for me yet? And you're like, whoa. And it's amazing how, that's not being too much of a hard ass, but it's amazing how people don't do that. And so you just keep doing that. And then people are like, oh, it's like the most common thing that people do is say, oh, Gareth, can you get me that on Friday? And then 3 weeks time, I'm like, oh, Gareth, have you got that for me yet? And you're like, oh, no, I haven't done it yet. Or the converse is, you send it to me on Friday, and then 3 weeks later, I say, oh, Gareth, you've got those numbers. And you're like, well, I bust a gut to send it to you on Friday at 3 p.m. And 3 weeks later, you're having a look at it. And so being realistic about those things. And so I think if there's one thing, it's like, there's a really interesting TED talk on authenticity, and why we should all be more inauthentic. And I really enjoyed listening to it, because one of the things that he said was that, what is authenticity? And it's like, you stand in front of a room and you give a speech to 50 people, and 50 people will interpret it in a different way. So therefore, you think you're being authentic at the front of the room, but 50 people will interpret it in slightly different ways. And I think when you start to realize that, you realize just how important communication and repeating what it is you're trying to do, how it is you're going to be holding account of it, why it's going to be important. Just repeating is super important, because it's so easy to be like, well, I've already told them, and then it's not working. It's like, yeah, but you need to say it again and again and again, and keep reiterating why these things are happening.
Yeah, absolutely. I'll have to check that out. Do you know who the TED Talk is given?
I don't know whether it's the one by a guy called Dan Pink, but his might be the one on cognitive bias. But I will have it. I can send it over to you so you can.
Yeah, by all means, it'd be good to put it on the show notes as well, so people can check it out. Okay, great. Well, look, I just wanted to ask you as well about What sort of innovation are you guys working on right now? What are you most excited about that Vey Global are doing right now?
So we've got our main product is called Digital Assistant, and it recreates the in-store experience online for brands. And its look and feel is fantastic, and that's what people like. We want to build real-time intelligence into it so that we can be meeting demands of consumers going forward. At the moment, the brain that powers it is got some machine learning in, but there needs to be a whole load more work going into the machine learning and the AI side of things. And I think that what we're really excited about is that we want to be able to understand anonymous users a lot more. Everyone is talking about privacy on the internet, about cookies, about tracking, etc., etc. There's a huge amount that you can do to personalize the content that people are seeing, to personalize an experience online, to help guide them through their buying process, without necessarily knowing a lot of these things. So a lot of the actions that people are taking on site. If you think about a shop assistant in store, like if they see you walking up and down the aisle 3 times, they're pretty sure that maybe they should be going in to help you, to give you a bit of a nudge or ask you what's going on. That's not because you're a white male, because they know your name. These are anonymous signals that they're able to pick up. And so what we're really focused on is making it so that our interaction with clients on your site doesn't need you to be logged in, but also doesn't need you to necessarily have a cookie dropped and then to be tracing you around the internet. There's a whole load of information that we can be bringing out that then will help us divide between shopper modes. So are you in the research mode? Are you in the buying mode? Are you in the browsing mode? And obviously that, depending on what mode you're in, depends what message, what nudge, what information you need to be being surfaced to you. And so the more intelligence that we're going to be able to be building into a digital assistant or our product, the better we're going to be doing at serving recommendations to you, the better we're going to be at personalizing your journey. And I think that we are at the start of that, really. We've got a good interaction audience engine at the moment. But I mean, it's kind of like, I'm in Italy at the moment, so like a Vespa's pretty good, right? But you know what, a Ferrari would be pretty cool as well. And I think that that's the kind of the movement that we're planning on our audience engine over the next few years. So that's very exciting. And then kind of less sexy exciting, but really important for us, is our platform and how we're building the platform to basically be able to gain more insights and drive more automation into the campaigns that we're running for our clients. And so building that platform that puts the ability for some of our brands to control some of their campaigns a bit more in their hands, I think will be helpful in the long term. That's quite a big project that we're working on. So those two things actually kind of fit together. So we've got our platform, our product, and then the brain to be powering everything as we go along, and that we're all working on at the same time.
Obviously, third-party cookies, I believe, are being phased out, aren't they, at the moment?
Phased out end of 2023 now, but yes.
Quite a while away, but I mean, it'll be here before we know it, I suppose.
Yeah.
So, what is that going to force a lot of innovation in this space? And if so, what are going to be what's going to be the impact of this?
It's forcing a huge amount of innovation in the space already. I mean, so it was until, I guess it was probably June time, that third-party cookies were going to be being depreciated in the Chrome browser at the end of this year. And so like Safari and Firefox have already depreciated them. But the reason it became such big news is that Chrome has got 60% of the browser market. And they were like, okay, well, we're going to depreciate third-party cookies, and then you're not going to be able to do any tracking. And that then 90% of brands in the UK, even though this had been flagged for a number of years, not prepared for that change. And so it caused a whole load of like, oh my God, what are we going to do? Because a lot of the advertising that's done, the trainers that follow you around the internet, that's because you went to office.com, you looked at some trainers, you then left the website, and then they're resurfacing those trainers for you as they're tracking you out from the cookie. And that's a large part for quite a few businesses. And then also just the tracking, so that you know where you're spending, where your advertising spend is going and how it's translating into success for you. So people have been coming up with lots of different ways to kind of address it, to either limit the impact or to not need that information anymore. And the core of our business is actually on site, and so it's not driven so much by third-party cookies. We have got a part of our business that will be impacted, but when it's depreciated. But our part actually has been what I don't know if you've heard, but a lot of companies are talking about their first-party data strategy. So first-party data is data that you would give up when you go to a website, as opposed to a cookie being dropped and tracking you all over the place. And so a lot of companies are trying to focus on first-party data, on getting users logged into their site, so that then we know who you are and then we can serve things to you. And I think that's a change versus what we're looking to do. Yes, we can enable brands to get a user logged in, but I think more interestingly is, how do you make it so that we can meet the demands of anonymous users? How is it that we can help you segment and serve messages to anonymous users, and then we're not concerned about cookies, first or second party, etc.
I'll tell you one thing I won't miss, though. When you go onto a website and you get that bloody big long question asking you if they can keep your cookies or not, it's so annoying. Every website, everyone.
It's so annoying, and I think that I was actually reading in the papers today about that being a potential, like the GDPR being a potential area of divergence between the UK and Europe in the coming years. With I think it's specifically mentioned, with people hating the 10-page cookie banner.
Yeah, for sure. I know e-commerce is obviously your area of expertise, and we've already covered quite a lot of that. But I wanted to ask you a question. It's a bit of a weird question, Jack, okay? But nonetheless, I'm sure it is a question. We were talking earlier on about Whitney Town Centre in Oxfordshire. Now, I want to ask you specifically about town centres, okay? I want to ask you about central business districts, the inside of cities. E-commerce is only going to get stronger and stronger. Amazon seems to be taking over the world. What do you think the future holds for town centres and traditional retail?
I think that there's a difference between the future for town centres and the futures for traditional retail. I think that if you say, well, so therefore for traditional retail brands, you're going to need to be online. You need to have your e-commerce business up and running, operating. I think that over the next 5 years, we're only going to see more and more purchases going online. People are going to be much more comfortable making considered purchases online. You can see the advances we're getting with kind of augmented reality and how does this lipstick look on me? How do these glasses look on me? I bought my first pair of glasses online a couple of months back, and okay, they didn't have augmented reality, but the service was amazing. The price was amazing because they don't have a whole load of stores. The choice of frames was great. I've recommended it to all of my friends now because I had got 2 pairs of glasses for £200 that look really, really slick. And so I think that these considered purchases, that's going to keep going online. So therefore, traditional retail, it's important they live with it. Town centres, but then I also think that shopping, and I think my most recent experience would probably be living in Oxford and the Westgate Centre has recently, so the big shopping centre that's recently opened. Shopping is an experience that people like going on. I mean, I might not like going shopping, and so therefore I haven't been going shopping for a long time. But people still want to go and meet people. People still want to go to town centres. You look at Marks and Spencer's, and they're talking very much about their shops becoming distribution centres, so that they can fulfil orders within a day. I think that actually the future for town centres continues to be pretty positive. I look at where I live in London, and there's already been a big change because I guess different areas of the country move at different speeds. You look down the main street near me, big change towards services. There's your yoga studios, there's your vets, there's your private GPs.
And it's about experience, isn't it?
It's about experience, and so therefore then your shop becomes an experience as well. And so therefore I'm going to a town centre because I've got all these experiences that I can get hold of, and maybe I'm not going to buy anything, and I'm just going to I went to Zara a year ago, and downloaded that app. I hate shopping, and moreover to I hate shopping, I hate carrying bags, and so I walked into Zara and I downloaded the app, and you could just QR scan everything, and it got delivered to me the next day. That was amazing. That was an amazing experience for me, and it was quite nice to be able to go in and look around and do stuff. And so for me, I think that traditional retail has to be focused on making sure that their online channel is working for them and is functioning, and that they're keeping abreast of basically as more and more considered purchases go online, that they can supply that. I think town centres as a whole will continue to have lots of shops, niche shops. People still want to go and meet people, but I think it's going to become more experience based as well.
What technology innovation are you most excited about at the moment? AI, blockchain, quantum computing, or anything specific? What are you most sort of impressed with, and what are you keeping an eye on right now?
I think that AI is going to have an absolutely humongous impact to the whole of not only the internet but all of our lives in the coming years. I think that it's a proper cliche to say it, but like climate change is such a massive problem, and the technological innovation is going to be so important to how we're going to be addressing it. And so whether that's hydrogen fuel cells, whether that's improving battery technology so that we can store more renewable energy that comes through, how we're cutting our carbon footprint, those technology innovations, I think are the ones that are so important, because it doesn't feel like with the best will in the world, we're going to be able to change people's habits quickly enough. Stop driving everywhere, stop flying everywhere, stop eating red meat, etc. We can start to make some of those changes, but I think that like technological innovation around energy consumption, storage, usage, I mean that is going to be so important for us.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think technology is going to be, it's going to be the center point of our fight against climate change, isn't it? I think so. Yeah. What about the world of the future of the workplace then? I know you guys.
I love that. I love that. It's really interesting as well.
Yeah. So I'm assuming you obviously adapted during the pandemic. I know you took the CEO role in between the lockdowns. Have you sort of moved over to a completely remote situation now, or you?
We actually have moved over to a completely, we're a remote working as standard business. We are very lucky. We've got a long-term relationship with WeWork, and they have been very understanding with us and in terms of sorting out how our office space works. So our staff have got access to WeWorks around the country, but we don't expect people to come in. And we've worked really, really well in this remote setup. And when we talk about it internally and we're trying to kind of pinpoint some of these things, it's like, well, some of it has been the renewed focus that has helped us. That has maybe been why we feel like we've been a lot more productive. It's been a really, really exciting 12 months with, instead of having to clear house anymore, we're actually in a phase where we're building things. And so therefore, that helps morale. But I don't think that. I think we've also established we're very good on the remote working side of things and getting that go through. So I think that we're happy with it. Also recognise, as you kindly said earlier, I've still got a long career ahead of me, but I also recognise that I'm super lucky. I'm 41. I've got 3 kids. Live in a house. I've got some space where I can do some work when I'm working from home. Like really, really lucky. If I hadn't been into an office when I was 21, 22 and working at Citigroup, I don't think I'd have had any friends for the first 10 years when I was living in London. I almost certainly would never have had a girlfriend for the whole time I was in London, And so I think that it's understanding, okay, well, it might work well for me at this moment in time, But what about all the people it doesn't really work well for? And how do we make sure that it does work well for those people, for people who are new into the workforce, people who are new into their company? We've done okay with people new into the company, but trying to get that balance of the hybrid model working is going to be a really big challenge for us. That being said, what I've really liked is we now are employing people all around the country, and I love that. I mean, okay, I live in London, and so therefore my own strange, but we've been too London centric as a country and as a company, and so our social media manager lives in Portsmouth. She is amazing. She's taught me so much in the couple of months that she's been over. We don't need her to be living in London. She'll come and see us every now and then, and that's great. But she can be working in Portsmouth. We've got an engineer up in Yorkshire. We've got we're so dispersed now around the country that it just really helps us find more talented people, in that area. And I think that's one of the really big positives that we've had from the model that we've got now.
What 3 words would you use to describe your leadership style, Jack?
Driven, decisive, but friendly.
So, look, tell us a little bit about Jack outside of work then. What are you in? I know you're into your hockey. What else are you into? What do you do? Besides, obviously, the kids, they take up a lot of your time.
I don't actually play hockey anymore. I played for one, and kind of, I got to the point where, I was like, God, this is a lot of hard work. Outside, I mean, I've got 3 kids, 5, 4, and 2, nearly 3. So they're a handful. I really like running at the moment. It's like, how boring is that? But I was reading a bit in the Times about kind of like lockdown cliches and like the conversations that you just don't want to hear. It's like, oh yeah, I've set a new PB for my 10K during lockdown. And I'm like, I'm exactly that kind of person. And I'm thinking, oh,
you've become that guy.
I've become that person. For my birthday, my wife bought me a Garmin watch, and so therefore, this is amazing. I can keep tracking. Yeah. So
well, in terms of fitness fads, I think during lockdown, it was either taking up running or paying an extortionate amount of money for a Peloton bike. A lot of people doing that as well.
And I can't face exercise bikes; they just drive me crazy. So therefore, so I like running. I like keeping fit, and I guess I think actually the main thing is hanging out with the family and spending some time with them and seeing friends. And so keeping. From the MBA, I have a very geographically dispersed network of people. So on the MBA, there were 61 different countries represented, and so therefore I've got a lot of friends, in lots of different areas. So kind of keeping in touch with them and their careers is always interesting as well.
Yeah, no, absolutely. What advice would you give to your 21-year-old self? I'm assuming that's probably around the time you started in trading. But what advice would you give? Not just about trading, about life. Like, what advice would you give yourself?
It's interesting because I was speaking to a 21-year-old at a wedding that I went to 3 weeks ago, and
oh wow,
and he really wanted to get into banking, really wanted to get into trading. I was like literally like, and so therefore I think I was sitting next to him. At the meal, and he was quizzing me on a whole lot of things, and was kind of like, and I said, and I think the best bit of advice that you can really give is like, and it's not advice that you want to hear at 21. But it's like, just remember that the next 5 years of your career is not your career. And so, so therefore it's like, and I was thinking exactly the same thing. It's like, well, I need to be a trader. I need to be a trader now. Or I need to do this. I need to do this. I need to do this. It's like, well, actually, you're 21. The chances are you're going to be working until you're 71. So the next 5 years of your career is not your career. It's actually just 10% of it. So like, don't panic about like how far you've got at that page, because you at 21 you're comparing yourself to every single person. You're always being like, oh well, this person's here by this point, etc. It's like, okay, but like, think it is a marathon, not a sprint. And at 21, you don't want to hear that. You want to hear that it's a sprint and I'm going to keep sprinting. But I think that bit of advice will be ignored. Like, people will be like, shut up, you're 40, you didn't do that, who cares? Like, no way. Best bit of advice, like, form a plan and then execute it. So for me, 21, I want to be a trader. Okay, form a plan that's realistic. Okay, well, I can't just go from here to there tomorrow, but I can. But what I'm doing now makes me look attracted to this. That makes me look attracted to this. That makes me look attracted to this. That can get me into being a trader in the future. So think about it that way, realistically, and then you just got to execute it, and that involves a shitload of hard work.
Sure. Yeah, you can't substitute hard work, though, can you? So, no, that's really good advice, Jack. I really enjoyed it. And just to finish up, what sort of person? What story or book have you read, or documentary have you watched, or anecdote? Anything like that? Any piece of content that you've consumed, really, that's inspired you, or maybe something that's helped you get some perspective.
I read quite a lot of books, and mainly, someone recently recommended Sir Alex Ferguson's biography on leadership.
Okay, I've not read that one, but I'm a big fan.
It's so interesting, and what I love about that biography, and I'm not a massive football fan at all. I've grew up playing rugby, and so that's what I'm really into, and so therefore I basically just support anyone who's winning. So for a while I supported United, and then I started supporting City, and then I started supporting Chelsea, and then I moved to Liverpool, and so therefore, I'll go for anyone. But again, he was very much like, get the basics right. Like, you don't need to do all these fancy things. Get the basics right, and everything's going to look after itself. But then as I went through it, he referenced a book by a woman called Angela Duckworth called Grit. And to me, like, perseverance and never giving up is like, it's super, super, super important. And I love those types of people. And that's really what Alex Ferguson said as well, is like, give me a gritty player any day of the week over one with a little bit more talent. And I think that that book, Grit, by Angela Duckworth, is really, really interesting. If you're looking for something that's making you think, like, that's quite inspiring. I'll finish with saying, so my daughter's sports day, it's not about the winning, is what I was always saying to her. It's like, but what do you have to do? And if I ask her now what she has to do at sports day, she's like, persevere and never give up. And that makes me so happy that her answer to that is persevere and never give up, because I know that we're moving in the right direction.
That is brilliant. I gotta give this counter recommendation, and you may have already have seen this, Jack, but there's a movie called The Founder. Have you seen it? It's about McDonald's. It's about the founder of McDonald's. He's not actually the founder. He was the guy who essentially scaled McDonald's. He wasn't one of the McDonald's brothers. I can't remember the guy's name now. He's a famous Hollywood actor. I can't remember his name. It's just gone. But it's a brilliant film. But he Michael Keaton. Michael Keaton's in it. That's the guy. And he basically says at the beginning, people always ask me, what trait I had to be this successful, with growing in a restaurant to the global behemoth that it is. And he said one word: perseverance. And it just it fits right in with what you said. So I'd recommend you to watch that, and anyone else who's listening as well. It's a fantastic film. Even if you don't like McDonald's, if you're a vegan, you'll still enjoy the film, okay? But yeah, so look, on that note, I think it's been a brilliant conversation, Jack. I've really, really enjoyed it. We've gone drastically over. So I'm really sorry. I know you want to get out of the sun.
Not at all.
But I've been a bit selfish and kept you on because I've literally really enjoyed our chat, okay? So thank you so much for coming on. Where can the listeners sort of connect with you, find V Global?
So V Global, we're on LinkedIn, we're on Twitter, we're on Facebook. We actually publish a fair amount of stuff onto our blog, which I think would be a good place to get hold of me. I mean, I'm on LinkedIn. I actually have to say that I'm not on any other social media. It's not. It's just such a time suck.
No, with 3 kids, you need all the time you can get, Jack, don't you? Once again, thanks for coming on. I really appreciated it.
All right, brilliant. Thank you very much. Cheers, Gareth.
Thanks for listening to the Tech Leaders Podcast with your host, Gareth Davies. We hope you enjoyed our deep dive into all things tech. If you're keen to learn more, make sure you tune in to our next episode. A huge shout out to Be Digital, who make this podcast possible. Go check them out at BeDigitalUK.com to gain expert help on enabling your organisation to become lean, agile and attract the right talent. That's BeDigitalUK.com. Join the tech revolution with the Tech Leaders Podcast.